Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest session in our Money in the Church webinar series. My name is Daniel Gurton. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Church Management in the Villanova School of Business. So on behalf of Matt Mannion, Chesley Turner, and all of the Center's staff and faculty, we would like to welcome you to this presentation, welcome you virtually to Villanova University. If this is the first session that you're joining us, welcome to the series and to our webinar series. If you've been to our previous ones, then welcome back. We're excited to be able to continue this particular series on money in the church. Last week's session was really engaging and a lot of great information and perspective. So we're looking forward to more of the same for our presentation today. So just to give you an idea of what to expect, I will open things up. I'll lead us in prayer in just a moment. For those who are new to the center or new to this series, I'll just tell you a little bit about what we do here at the center. And then I will hand things over to Matt Mannion, who's the faculty director of the center, to introduce our speaker today. So today's session is called Latinx Financial Giving and Clergy Responses, the Impact of Relevant Stewardship Frames. Our presenter is Maureen K, Ph.D. Really looking forward to hearing what Dr. Day has to share with us. We're really lucky to have had her working with the center in the past, and it's nice to be able to give her the opportunity to share some of her research and the insight that she's gained. So today, if you don't know, I'm guessing many of you did not, today is the feast of St. Arnold Jansen, who, although you may not know him, you may know him from some of the work that he has done. So he was he's a Dutch saint. He was the founder of multiple religious orders. He's the founder of the Society of the Divine Word, the Holy Spirit Missionary Sisters, and the Holy Spirit Adoration Sisters. And the last one on that list, the Holy Spirit Adoration Sisters, are also known as the Pink Sisters. So those of you in Philadelphia may know the Pink Sisters have a convent here in Philadelphia, and part of their charism is perpetual adoration. So even right now, if you went to their convent in Philadelphia, there would be a sister there praying and being present to Jesus. And I know just from friends and associates of mine, the power of that witness and kind of the stability and fidelity of that. And what I think is very interesting about St. Arnold is that he is known by the work that he was able to do, not necessarily through his own abilities, but by enabling others to do work. Two of the orders he founded were women's religious orders. So he could not actually be a part of the work that they were doing, but he put in the work to get them off the ground, presumably get the capital for convent and go through all the process. So in many ways, he was a church manager many years ago, and I think is a good example to us to just to keep in mind the impact that we have and our role as church leaders and administrators in enabling others to do work as well. We're all called to follow Jesus and to do great things, but sometimes that entails equipping and preparing others to do those things. So with that in mind, I will open us up with a brief prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, we thank you for this day and this opportunity to be here today. We pray that you can help us to grow in knowledge and wisdom, to increase our ability to successfully and faithfully steward the gifts that have been entrusted to us. We pray that we may all grow in our willingness to be open fully to you, that our generosity and giving of self might lead others towards you. We ask that, like St. Arnold, you may bless our endeavors and prosper the work of our hands, and that we can share in his desire that your heart live in the hearts of all. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Center for Church Management provides education and scholarship in the Augustinian Catholic tradition on strategic management and temporal matters in service to leaders of churches and other Christian faith-based ministries. And the vision for our center is to be a global resource for church management knowledge, both the creation of it, but as well as the facilitation and dissemination of it. This webinar is funded in part through the Lilly Endowment's National Initiative to Address Economic Challenges Facing Pastoral Leaders. We're very fortunate to have the support of the Lilly Endowment, which enables us to facilitate research, to help scholars fund their research, as well as to hold programming and events that get some of that information out to those who are in the trenches. We're also very fortunate to have the benefactors to our centers who also help fund this webinar and much of what we do. So from here, I'm going to pass things off to Matt Mannion, who is our faculty director.
And who's wearing the same sweater today that I wore in that picture a year ago. So hopefully y'all can forgive me for that. It's not my Lily sweater, although maybe I should get it engraved with Lily in gratitude for the generosity. Well, no, it's great to be with you all again. And we are looking forward to a wonderful conversation today. This is part of the center's efforts to share information. And so one of the places that we've been really blessed is, as we are situated here in the business school, but like all the centers for excellence, we're committed to that discovery, dissemination, and application of knowledge. And so we do that through our degree programs, and I see a lot of graduates of our Masters in Church Management here. We do it through our non-degree programs, and I see a lot of folks who have participated in our certificate, our non-degree certificate in church management program here. And we do that through our research and scholarship. And so we're kind of getting a twofer with it today, because as part of the grant from the Lilly Endowment, as part of that national initiative to address economic challenges facing pastoral leaders, we were able to sponsor, 2 years ago, we were able to sponsor 10 research fellows to do and commission them and reviewed their proposals. And it was a very competitive application process, but Maureen was one of the 10 research fellows selected who wanted to make a contribution to the whole area of financial literacy and financial education for our churches. And so we not only got the benefit of walking that journey with her through her research, but then also get the benefit of putting it out there to reach more and more people. So I've had the good fortune of seeing this presentation at least twice so far, and I find it fascinating every time. I saw it when she did it as part of the Research Fellows, but then also got to see it when she presented it as part of the Religious Research Association and the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. So for all of you out there who didn't know that there's a Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, there actually is, and the Religious Research Association, which are collections of scholars and practitioners. And so, so we've got some excellent stuff that we think can be really beneficial. And we're thrilled as a center to be able to continue to facilitate this interaction between people who are doing great research and great scholarship and people who are doing great ministry and great practitioners out there in their churches. And so, we're real excited about this. The format, for those who've been with us, it's the same, fairly straightforward. So we're going to give Maureen the floor in just a second, and she will take us through her research and her scholarship for about 35 minutes or so. And then there'll be time at the end for some Q&A before we wrap things up promptly at 2 o'clock Eastern time. But as we've done in the past too, Maureen has graciously agreed to stick around. So if you have a question that doesn't get answered before 2 o'clock, we will have the bonus time where it won't be recorded, but she'd agree to stick around and answer a few more questions there. We would ask, if you can, to just use the chat function. There's a Q&A function for you. And so if you can put your questions in there. And in general, we prefer to try and minimize the sidebar conversations in there so everyone can stay focused on the great information that Maureen is sharing with us. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce her to you. Dr. Maureen Day is the Assistant Professor of Religion and Society at the Franciscan School of Theology. She's out there in San Diego. She is a research fellow at the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate at Georgetown right now, our good friends at CARA. She's also been a research fellow at the Center for the Study of Religion and Society at Notre Dame, as I mentioned, with us at Villanova at the Center for Church Management. She's got a training in theology and social sciences and writes for both academics and practitioners. It's that connection that I've always been so impressed with, and I think you will be as well. She was last year published her latest book, which is Catholic Activism Today, Individual Transformation and the Struggle for Social Justice. 2 years ago, she published Young Adult American Catholics, Explaining Vocation in Their Own Words. Has been involved in a number of other significant studies on campus ministry, on marriage preparation programs, and obviously this study, which we're going to get the benefit of hearing from today. And so if you haven't known Maureen before, I think you'll certainly know her after this hour, and you'll certainly continue to see her for many, many years to come. She's one of the bright talents in this whole world of church management and church research and scholarship. So I'm looking forward to continuing to follow and learn from you, Maureen, not only today, but for many, many years to come. And so with that, we'll hand it over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for that generous introduction, Matt. And thank you so much for the Center for having me today to be able to share this with people who are working with Hispanic parishioners or just wondering how this research might apply to their own context. Hopefully there'll be some theoretical tools that you can use to apply what's going on to different contexts. So again, I'm looking at what I was originally interested in is what motivates Latino, Hispanic, Latinx giving. And I wanted to see especially what are the sorts of frames that pastors use to encourage giving among their parishioners, and also to see like what are the frames that Latinx Catholics themselves bring to their understanding of stewardship, and where there might be a match or a disconnect. So just to give you a really brief literature review, there's been a couple studies that have looked at and established that Latino Catholics give less than the non-Latino Catholics do. This first bullet point is from Othman Ospino's work with Cara. They joined together for this. They did a joint study for this. But they found that Hispanic serving parishes have offertory collections 15.7% lower than the national average. And then Chuck Zeck, who's part of the center over here at Villanova, also teamed up with Cara. And in their study of Catholic parishes, they found that the higher the proportion of Latinx Catholics in a parish, the smaller the weekly offertory. So we have established in a couple different studies that Latinx Catholics give less, but we didn't know why. And so this is where my research really wanted to dive into. And then outside of ethnicity and just looking at how the way people view stewardship more broadly. Christian Smith and his colleagues came out with a book called Passing the Plate that looks at that across a variety of Christian denominations. And they found that there was two main frames, ways of understanding that pastors brought to their parishioners or their congregants. And that was a paying the bills frame, which is what they called it, which was really kind of like this apologetic way of saying, we just need to keep the lights on. We've got to make ends meet. If you could just throw something into the basket this week, I hate to talk about this, that sort of thing. That was sort of the paying the bills frame. And this what they found was extremely common in Catholic parishes. And this can partially explain why Catholic giving tends to be less than Protestant giving when you look at that as well. But they also found that a much more inspiring frame that a lot of pastors used, especially outside of the Catholic tradition, was the living the vision frame, which was about thinking about stewardship in a way that connected it to discipleship more broadly, relationship to one's community, and just really imagine what we could do if we put a little more money into the basket. So this was a different way that tended to encourage a lot more giving. So knowing that there were these two frames already in the research, I wanted to explore, was there anything different going on among Hispanic Catholics and Hispanic Catholic parishes? And to briefly go into the methods, just in case you're not familiar with where the San Diego Diocese is, it's in the very southern tip of California. It goes all the way to the Arizona border. So it's the Baja California border. It includes San Diego and Imperial counties. So this is where my research is situated. Lots of Hispanic Catholics in this region of the country, predominantly from Mexico, owing great in part to its location right on the border. So just to look at who I was looking at, I looked at 10 high Hispanic parishes. 5 of them, and I did this in cooperation with the Diocese of San Diego. We identified 5 that were lower income, and 5 that were middle or higher income, because we wanted to make sure we didn't just look at ones that were low income. We wanted to see a spectrum of economic experience in the parishes we're looking at. And then I conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews with the pastors. There were 9 pastors in the 10 parish study, because one of the pastors was pastoring 2 parishes. And then there's 7 interviews with low givers and 6 interviews with high givers. And I wanted to also qualify what I mean by low givers and high givers. I asked the pastors if they could identify for me, not with low givers, not the people who give the least, and with high givers, not the people who give the most, but based on what the pastors knew, and this is a difficult thing to do, but based on what the pastors knew, who are people that in your estimation, based on what, like the sort of life they live, the home they own, the car they drive, etc., who do you think really gives beyond their means? And we're going to call those people high givers, regardless of what they actually give, because they could live in a very modest home, but put in, $50 a week in the basket. And we're going to call people who, in your estimation, you think could give more, and we're going to call those people low givers. So this was a lot of cooperation required with the pastors. So it's not, it's subjective to an extent. It's the best we could do, but we didn't want to take the highest givers and the lowest givers. And also I wanted to make sure the low givers were active in the parish, because I want to make sure these people just weren't disengaged. So for the low givers, I said, make sure these people are involved in other ministries in your parish as well. So we have that going on. And then, so the basic research questions that are going on as well. I'm asking, what are the frames, what are the ways of understanding stewardship that priests are currently using to foster giving among Latinx Catholics? I'm also looking at the Latinx Catholics themselves, asking what are the frames that motivate their giving? And another thing that I want to ask, so are the frames of stewardship that are effective in predominantly white parishes, like the Living the Vision frame that we're talking about with Smith's work earlier, less effective in predominantly Hispanic parishes? Or another way to look at that is, are pastors of Hispanic parishes not using effective frames to encourage giving among their Hispanic Catholic parishioners? And then the final kind of summary question that encapsulates a lot of this is, why is Hispanic giving low, and how can clergy most effectively respond? So this is the main question that's driving the research, and that is going to help us move forward and to apply the findings in a way that can make sense for practitioners. Okay, and so I want to jump ahead to that piece before I walk through the findings, because I think if you have kind of the practical aspect in the front of your mind, you'll see how we get to the conclusions at the end, and can kind of tune into the theory as it unfolds. All right, so the first thing that I found is that the paying the bills frame, which was kind of marginalized and pushed to the side, actually does have some important purposes. It's not this is the end game sort of a frame that we want to bring to parishioners, but it does have its own purposes in getting to stronger frames of giving. So we want to look at how paying the bills might resonate with Hispanic Catholics. There's a frame that I identified called receive then give, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But the receive then give frame is really present in the imagination of both the pastors and the parishioners themselves, and has a lot of deep theological resonance in the Catholic tradition. And so this is something that can also be a stepping stone to get elsewhere. And then finally, there's the frame that I call corresponsabilidad, which is very much like the cognate of co-responsibility. This was identified in a Catholic news agency article in 2004. It was kind of just brought up to the surface of this could be a new frame to encourage Hispanic giving, but I was never able to find any other research that went beyond this. And so basically the idea is that this frame can be a very motivating frame for Latino Catholics, and it can be seen as a Hispanic version of Living the Vision. Co-responsibilidad was offered as an alternative to stewardship, because there's no word for stewardship in the Spanish or in the Portuguese, and as I found out later, in the Italian language either. That actually this translates to administración, and which would translate to English best as administration, which doesn't really have that same sort of deep spiritual resonance that stewardship carries with it. And so this is a new term that we could argue we could bring to Catholics. And then also family is an important analogy for giving in at least the Mexican American context that I studied. Even though I went out to study Latinx Catholics more broadly, because of my location, all 13 of my interviewees all had Mexican origin to it. So I want to make sure that we aren't overly robust with the way we draw these conclusions, but we can consider them important and exploratory at the same time. All right, so the way that I'll share my findings with you is that first we'll look at the pastor interviews, specifically the perceived obstacles to giving they identified, and the stewardship frames that they use. And then we'll go to the high giver interviews and see what we found there, and then go to the low giver interviews. All right, so with the pastor interviews, I was also very open-ended with the way I was asking things. I didn't want to kind of explore, well, this pastor said this, what do you think about this? I wanted to really kind of let it be their own experience and not be shaped by what my theories or ideas bring to it. So one thing to keep in mind is that when we're talking to any of these people that we're talking to, but I think it's more pertinent for the pastors, is that we need to be able to identify the difference between perceptions and reality. So if I ask a pastor, why do you think Hispanic Catholics have trouble giving? And they'll identify those things. That's not necessarily the reality, but it's their perception of that reality, right? So if they say, well, it's because they have they're experiencing a lot of poverty and low income and those sorts of obstacles, then what that gives them is what Ann Swidler would call strategies of action. So if they believe that poverty limits Latino giving, then they're going to say, oh, like, why would I bother asking if they don't have that? So their own perception of reality shapes the strategies that they're going to try to take. So that's why these obstacles are important, not because they reveal reality to us, but because they reveal the perceptions of the pastors and the way that they can act in that reality. And so what we found is that 6 of the 9 pastors that we talked to named financial hardships as one of those things. Just to take, so if you've worked with empirical like the quantitative folks, they really like showing you charts and percentages. I'm a qualitative person, so I like my quotes. So you're gonna get lots of quotes throughout this. But just to give you a poll quote, they said they cannot give more than what they have. So, if you have a sense that people can't give any more than what they're giving, then you're going to feel really bad about asking, right? And so this will shape the way that you approach stewardship within your parish. 2 of those 6 specifically named sending money abroad, family remittances back home to Mexico as a hardship that their parishioners were experiencing. Another thing that came was low giving patterns from Mexico. And so just to give you a little history here, a lot of, when Catholicism was found from Mexico southward, brought to those countries, it was typically funded by the Spanish crown initially, so that these were the financial stewardship of one's local church was not an expectation. And when that relationship with Spain was severed, in different ways, they had sometimes the local state would fund the church. Sometimes a wealthy benefactor would fund the church, but it was very rare that a community was expected to fund the church. And so you always had kind of a person over here, or an authority who gave, and then the local people would make sure the church was clean, would make sure the priest had meals, would make sure the vestments were washed and the houses were repaired and that sort of thing. So this was the way that stewardship happened in a lot of countries, Mexico southward, for the ordinary faithful. And then, so 5 of the pastors named that as a challenge. 3 specifically discussed the challenge of limosna, which is a Spanish word for almsgiving. So then this is a quote that helps illuminate this. A lot of Spanish speakers use the wrong term for tithing. They call it almsgiving, limosna. Limosna in Spanish means almsgiving. So we have to tell them it's ofrenda, it's an offering, it's a gift. So just to think about this, what that looks like. If people who have grown up in countries where they're not expected to fund their local church, their financial donations are done in the form of almsgiving, right? Which is a casual sort of like, what's in my, like, suddenly it's spontaneous, it's before me. What's in my pocket? What can I offer? So it's a matter of spontaneous giving. So that becomes a challenge when you're trying to encourage your community to give to a plate, where you're trying to budget and have them think in advance what they want to give. And if you're calling, oh, it's time for the ofrenda, or sorry, it's time for the limosna, that's going to be a challenge because people then just reach into for whatever they have. But if you use a different word like ofrenda, that's something that's about planned giving and thinking in advance. Only one pastor of the whole, and this is important because actually the parishioners are going to identify this as an important obstacle. So even though only one pastor identified it, nearly all of the people in the pews that I talked to said that this is an important challenge. So pastors might not have this on their radar as an obstacle for higher contributions. So only one said that they think that the parish, that people contribute less because they think the parish doesn't have the money. And so his quote is, I know Spanish-speaking communities are very generous. They are. But when it comes to being generous of terms of what we call the plate collection, they're no. They would do it, but they will give you $1 even though he has more than $1, which he can easily give. He would think that the church doesn't need it. So this pastor is identifying like a lack of understanding of how parish finances work. and the need that parish communities have. And a few other folks would point back to Mexico, like back in Mexico, when we gave money to the plate or we gave money to the priest, that was a gift to the priest. And so there might be some confusion as to what this money in the plate actually goes to. So that the church doesn't need it and has plenty of money. And we'll go into some of the details of that in a bit as well. So those were some of the obstacles the pastors identified. I also say, what are the ways that you frame giving when you're talking to your parishioners in homilies, maybe in bulletins, and for them to better understand what giving is? So all of the pastors used at least 2 frames to discuss how they do this. 3 of them used a paying the bills understanding, 2 of them used this living the vision, but there were other ones that I identified that didn't neatly fit into either of these 2 categories. 5 was the corresponsabilidad. So none of them, I said 0 here because none of them actually used that word, but they drew on themes that really tied into this corresponsabilidad. So this quote says, but say if the collection is down, you have to find a way in which you remind people that this is their home and that it's their responsibility. That my responsibility is to be the administrator, but it's everybody's responsibility to contribute. So, and other themes that kind of came out in other quotes were that, we're collaborators. We're collaborating with the whole parish, we're collaborating with God. So this co-responsibility that's there as well. And that this theme is practical because, we need to get the job done. And it's also relational, relationship to my fellow parishioners, relationship to my pastor, relationship to God. So relationship was really thick in this, in a way that it wasn't quite as thick in living the vision. So this is something that I also helped disentangle the co-responsabilidad from living the vision. And so this might be something too, this stronger communitarian sense might be stronger among Hispanic Catholics than it is for non-Hispanic Catholics. 4 of the pastors identified receive then give, and just to flesh that out a little bit more, that looks like is, basically, God has given to us so abundantly and what we receive, we want to receive with gratitude and then turn around and share that with the same sort of generosity that God gave us. So what we receive, we don't hold tightly, we hold loosely, and we're able to give it to others. So this is the kind of the theological piece that we found here in about half the pastors, and it's common as well among the parishioner interviews. So let's keep that on our radar. Discipleship and humans as naturally giving were there. I'm not going to go into them because they weren't really on the receiving end. They weren't in the parishioners' frame of reference. Only one of the pastors named family, and this seemed like it was actually a stronger frame for the parishioners themselves. So this is something that we want to keep in our heads as well. So one thing I'll just bring up a quote real quickly. So to see what this looked like, I said that the pastor said, the difference between, I said, is there a difference in the way that you talk to giving to Anglo-Catholics or white Catholics versus Hispanic Catholics? And he says, the difference between, Anglos and Hispanics is, I think the Hispanics feel it a little bit more. The Anglos would have a sense of duty to it. And so for Anglos, it's like, I'm blessed, I'm wealthy, but I understand I'm supposed to be this way as far as giving to their church. But the Hispanics say, yeah, it's like my sister and they need help. So we rise to the occasion. Yeah. And then I clarify, so more of a familial understanding of church among the Latino Catholics. Is that? No, it is family. It's family. Yeah. And so sometimes it's not so much their family, but it's we're family. And Mary is our mother and Jesus is they seem to get it. So this was the one pastor that talked about family as being a frame, and the only pastor that said, yeah, I think there is a difference between white and Hispanic Catholics in the reasons why they give. So I think there was a couple lessons in this. So first of all, familialism, just to point to some of the sociology literature, strong familialism isn't universal among all Hispanic cultures. It is very strong among Mexican culture. So we want to make sure that we don't kind of flatten the Mexican experience and say, oh, all Latino Catholics care about family. So just to keep that in mind. But there was also this a hesitation or a reticence from the pastors in wanting to say that there was a difference in the ways Hispanics and white Catholics would give. I think that there was a desire to amplify what they share. A lot of them said, oh, we all bleed red, that sort of thing, and really trying to appeal to a sense of universalism. I think they were concerned that they would fall into stereotypes. But if we don't practice cultural sensitivity and really listen to what the parishioners are doing, we really risk flattening ministry into something that really will be a Eurocentric sort of way of doing ministry. We need to be aware of the different intercultural sensitivities and that are going on. And so I think that this is something, a concern to not distinguish among ethnic groups might lead to a flattening of ministries. And I can talk more about that in the Q&A if you want me to. So those are the pastor interviews and the findings there. And I wanted to move to the high givers now. So 4 of the 6 folks mentioned a retreat as a moment of conversion that led to their greater stewardship. Just saying, what have you always given this much to the parish? 4 of them said, no, I was on a retreat. 2 of those people said that finances were explicitly mentioned, that finances were discussed on that retreat, and they had a new way of looking at finances. So they talked about a conversion moment in their own history of giving. And all of the high givers also said that there's no such thing as someone who really can't give, that is, and again, whether this is reality or not, but this is their perception. They said everyone can give something, and most of the people who give something can actually be giving more. All of the high givers, and this theme emerged a total of 15 times among the 6 different households that I talked to, named that some failed to perceive the needs of the parish or believe that the church has plenty of money as a problem. And a lot of them referred to themselves in this. And I think I have it. Yeah. So for example, this is one person we talked to, the high giver, and this was not a household, it was just himself speaking. I believe that 80% of people think the church has lots of money. It doesn't need it. And my research assistant said, 80%, you think? He said, yes. Think the church has money. This is the thinking. This was my thinking before I came to know God. That was your own thinking before. The church has money. It doesn't need it. But when you look, it's not true. They have much work, many people working. You see the work, the expenses the church take on. Many people say, no, the church has lots of money. I'm not going to give. So this is something, again, biographical to his own experience, that he feels is a common misconception among Hispanic Catholics, that they don't, and this is why paying the bills can actually be a really important thing. A lot of people think, oh, if we have a budgetary shortfall, the diocese will make up for it and it's going to be fine. They're not aware of the way parish and diocesan finances work together. And a lot of times they'll also see, for example, like one person talked about, oh, we had this really big party for the anniversary of our pastor, and I heard people at the party saying, see, the church doesn't need money. We all have this catered meal, and they're not realizing how much budgetary planning needed to go into it. They just see abundance sometimes and confuse that for the fact, and think that the church can spend money on whatever needs come up. And then finally, the 4th bullet point here, reporting the weekly collection totals can also be a double-edged sword for some people. One person said, or 2 people actually said, it motivates some to meet a goal, but one of the participants here worries that it can make others think all this they receive and wonder why the church would need more. And again, this might harken back to assumptions that the plate collection goes towards the priests, not understanding the ministries and the different, the cost of even just basic operations that are going on there. So there's some specific themes concerning the low and no givers. Again, thinking that it goes to the priest. One pastor also said that he's had people come up to him and they're astounded when they realize that money does not go to him. And then also the diocese will make up for any budgetary shortfall. So the main frames that came up for the high givers was paying the bills. They said, this is something we need to do. We need to do parish education. So rather than paying the bills as apologizing for needing to ask for money, what if we thought of paying the bills as something that could educate parishioners on the basic finances of their particular parish, how the money works in the diocese, and actually that they pay into the diocese, not receive money from the diocese, and those sorts of things. And then once the paying of the bills is done, we can move to receive, then give. So 4 of the parishioners, so that while this was also a common theme, if you remember, among the pastors, it's also like a deep part of the high givers frames. So this person talked about, we would say, why would they need so much money? She's talking about her own conversion experience here also. What we would say, why would they need so much money? Every year they have so many masses and so many of this, and they're always asking for money. To me, I was one of them that was always thinking that way, but then realized God has given us so much. Why can't we give back? And then 2 of them tied into this idea of corresponsabilidad, that, how can we as a church come together in a stronger way? So there's 2 kind of main themes. One of them is that there's this personal and interior commitment to God that needs to manifest in exterior ways. So I can't just have me and my God moment. It needs to actually be the fruits of my works need to manifest that relationship I have with God. So the research assistant asks, what other motives inspire you to contribute to your parish in time, talent, and treasure? And he says, for me, it's like responsibility. It's a responsibility to do it because, like I said before, if God gives to you, you are able to give. So this is also tied into receive, then give as well, as you can see. So God has given to you so you can feel you can give. That's it. So, and then it's also about having a shared vision among the parishioners. So everyone can do their own little part, right? Not everyone needs to be involved in everything, but if we all do our part and understand where we're headed and how that's tied into mission, then that's inspiring and can allow us to give more. So this quote says, actually, it's more like, it sounds ugly, a club in this case. I do not mean a paid exercise club, but a club that has a purpose. For the pleasure of belonging to the club, you put your resources to your action, and the goal of that club is achieved. I do not know how to make cookies for the homeless, for instance. It's a club. That's their purpose in that club. It's the same in this case. You have the pleasure of coming, and obviously it's a relatively large church that has big needs. So everyone does their part, and we see how it all is tied together in a shared mission. So before I go into what was different in the low giver interviews, I want to talk a little bit about what they shared with the high givers. So some of those themes were that the main reason for low Hispanic giving is an inability to recognize the financial needs of the parish or a belief that the church has ample money. So even the low givers said, this is a problem that we have in the Latino community. They were asked specifically to talk about giving within the Hispanic community. So low expectations of giving have longstanding cultural roots for many Hispanic Catholics. This was also brought up among the low givers and the high givers as well. This is what they have in common. Discussing giving in terms of paying the bills can educate Hispanic Catholics, enabling them to grow in their financial support of their parishes. And then also the parish is a family. This was really common. I think it was the low givers mentioned the word family or familia some 30 times, a total of 30 times across the 7 interviews. And then the 6 households that were high givers were in the 50s. So even though this interviews asked nothing about family or familia, these were themes that were spontaneously brought up within the interviews that had strong resonance. So the ways that the low givers were different from the high givers was that 5 of the 7 named the importance of the relationship to the priest to his parishioners. So 5 of the 7. This is a big chunk of people. So you can see how strong this might be for this community. If the fathers were more focused on helping, giving time to the parishioners, I believe that yes, you feel committed to giving. For example, if we go to a restaurant and the wait staff do not take care of us, even if I have the money, I don't give. This is what the Latino is looking for, and the Latino is like that. The Hispanic is like that. If you feel well cared for, one can provide, and the fathers are giving of themselves. They give their time and look at the needs of each person, then one contributes, and freely, but willingly, with pleasure. Even if one has to go without eating, he will still contribute. And among the low givers, there was also a more frequent and more serious reference to the poverty of the parishioners. So what the parishioners tended to look at were housing, medical, and being older. Those were kind of the 3 main ones that rose to the surface. While the pastors named citizenship issues, language barriers, and lower education as obstacles. But so you can see that the high givers didn't see like actual poverty as a problem, but definitely we're highlighting among the low givers and the pastors a more precarious existence for the parishioners. And interestingly, And 2 described a class-based understanding of giving. So that this might also harken back to that Spanish crown, lay people do this. Wealthy benefactor, lay people do this. But what this quote says is, let's say I'm a cleaning lady. I can donate very little, very, very little money, right? But if I know a doctor who belongs to the church, I probably think, well, he's a doctor. He can let it go, good money. So there's an idea that some sorts of people donate to the church and other sorts of people do other things in their generosity with the church. So this was something that came up as well. So that's the whole of my findings. And so just to spend a moment to pause and unpack. So revisiting what I discussed earlier, hopefully the intro helped make the findings make a lot of sense in a practical way for you, but we'll just revisit some of those here. So some better practices. So before going into the frames, I want to spend a little bit of time with 2 other things that I was not looking for in the interviews, but that came out in the findings. The first is recognizing the importance of the relationship of the priest and the parishioner. This seems to be really critical. And in a time when we're experiencing lower vocations, so the ratio of priests to parishioners is much more difficult pastorally than it was in the past. Recognizing that the more a priest can offload his administrative duties to other qualified people so that he can spend more time in direct ministry with the parishioners, this can really help here. So the more visible the priest is, the more a person feels connected to their pastor, feels connected to their parish, and is going to feel more willing to give. So just recognizing that, and not that there aren't challenges that come with that, I recognize that too. And then also recognizing the importance of addressing broader issues. So if sometimes we can say, well, they don't have anything to give, so I guess I'm not going to ask. Maybe we can start to see, as a part of mission and as a way to foster stewardship, addressing the broader issues that are challenging the congregation. For example, looking at high school completion and easing the college transition, asking, is there a way that we can create an English tutoring program in our parish? And then not also recognizing you don't have to do all of this yourself, but just being aware to be able to connect parishioners to the available social services in your area, and to see what sorts of things that you can connect people to help bring them out of those obstacles and the poverty that if they're mired in that, and to look at a different sort of future going forward, which is a very long-term way of fostering stewardship, but something that can be very important. And then to return to the frames, so what I would recommend people doing is not try to jump to corresponsabilidad. Like I'd say, let's go through the alphabet and get to that one. And we need, because I don't think that would resonate based on the fact that the paying the bills issues are really like so much at the forefront. So I would suggest that we begin with paying the bills, not in the way where we apologize for money in the way that Smith saw, but really talk about money and talk about parish finances. Use it as an educative way of inviting people to think more about money. So, the diocese is not going to meet the budgetary shortfall. The collection does not go to the priest. Being really transparent about what the sorts of bills are that the church faces, open with the budget, that sort of thing, and really highlighting the needs of the parish, and also tacking on to needs. But what else could we do if we had more money? Like, what are the things that we would really aspire to do if our budget could increase? And then once like a more firm foundation of what parish finances look like, going to receive, then give. And so looking at that as a shared frame that's already like existing in the imaginations of the pastors and the parishioners, and really building on that and going there. And then I think that with receive then give, that tacking on a corresponsabilidad framework would really make this a frame that resonates with, if perhaps not the Hispanic experience, the Mexican Catholic experience. This looks like it could be really fertile ground for that, and perhaps for the Hispanic experience more broadly as well. But it really highlights the relationship that people have with their parish and that people have with God and with their wider community, beyond the parish walls and into the community itself. And that family can be a really resonant analogy for helping people get there. And then just in the spirit of receiving then and giving, I want to thank folks for helping make this possible. the Villanova Center for Church Management put together, not only funded this, but also provided great mentorship throughout this project. And my research assistants and the diocesan and parish staff, who also made all of this possible. Huge thanks to everyone. And if you wanted to read the document on this, it's in American Catholic Studies, and you can contact me also here. So thanks so much.
Excellent, Maureen. Thank you so much. And even though I am more quantitative and next week's presentation is going to have more graphs in there, really appreciate the use of quotes to help us really make it incarnate, make it real for us. And so excellent, and love the very specific suggestions and recommendations at the end as well. Do get a couple questions, and for everyone else out there too, feel free to throw in additional questions in the chat room if you'd like to, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. But maybe just kind of, again, a very nuts and bolts one, but just to reiterate, so there's a question about, does their income dictate their amount? Is the amount given of Latinx givers a greater percentage than their Anglo counterparts? And so any thoughts on that? And again, I think you have enough, you had a great definition of high givers versus low givers for this study, but then you can speak to it perhaps in general. Anything you
saw? Yeah, looking a little more broadly, we don't see, even though, and I don't have household like numbers for Black Catholics, but if we look at, if we compare household Latino income in the United States and household African-American income in the United States, African-American is lower, but we don't see the same sort of budgetary shortfalls in Black Catholic communities. So what we're seeing is not a core, like, oh, they have less, so they give less. So we're seeing something unique among Hispanic Catholics, and we need to figure that out a little better.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. And I would say for all of us too, I think your definition of high givers and low givers is really not only brilliant, but also very provocative for all of us as we're looking at kind of how do we define that within our parishes, not using it purely as an absolute dollar amount, but as our giving relative to our means, I think. For sure. Yeah, I was curious, did you discuss that at all with the pastors and kind of what the reaction was to that as a different way of looking at high givers and low givers?
Yes, yeah. So that was, they said, it was always, when I would introduce the project to them, I would say, and then I'm going to interview high givers and low givers. And they said, oh, that'll be easy, but just pick the top givers. And I'm like, no, I'm not looking for financial. And then they said, oh, okay. And then when I explained to them the ways that doing it that way would have complicated or masked like what real giving looks like in the sense that we're looking at it here, then they said, oh, that's okay. Like, and then they're like, I have some ideas for you. So yeah, it was a fun conversation. And I think it made them think a little differently about giving.
And maybe it was interesting too in the chat room, but there was some, at least two comments of folks, one person who grew up in Mexico commenting on the concept of limosna was very common there, but the concept of supporting the church was not very common there. And yeah, I'm curious, as were people able to make the transition, Maureen, I guess, did you see folks outside of the retreat events, were there other things that were able to help people make the transition from limosna to more ofrenda, I think as you said it?
Ofrenda, yeah. Ofrenda. So they didn't, they talked about retreats, but they also just some of them who did not talk about retreats talked about just a sense of that this is the way, and people talked about, my parents gave some. So some of the times this was historical in a different sort of way, that their parents had always given to the church, whatever they talked about scraping by and making sure they had enough money to put in the basket. So I did not see a lot of frames and changes that happened outside of the retreat context. But what I can tell you about the retreat context was that the idea of money was integrated into a whole sense of relationship with God. So that this is, rather than, this being a part of it, it's just integrated with it. So I think, and if you could clarify too, the person who shared the difference between limosna and giving to the parish, I don't know what
she was just commenting. I was just commenting she was reinforcing your point that where she grew up, when they were asked to give, people got the money out of their pockets, whatever they had, and put some money in the collection basket, but they were never taught to give money to the church as an offering to God as their first fruits. So in order to have a change of mind, she was reinforcing that people need to be taught this here.
Right. And so then that's another curious question is, as because a lot more, we're seeing a lot less migration from Mexico and from other Latin American countries. So 93% of Hispanics in the United States are, I'm sorry, of the 93% of those 18 and under are born in the United States. So we're seeing people like raised in a US context, and how will generation then affect the way that people give? That's another layer to fold into this whole mix. So.
I guess that answers. So the question came through, was there any difference between those who were first generation immigrants versus those who were born and raised here? But
yeah, so I had people who were first generation, second generation, third generation in both groups, of the low givers and high givers, which kind of just says it might have a lot more to do with experience, and experiences, meaning how intentionally have I thought about the way I give and my financial contributions to my parish. If you're not invited into that conversation, then it's not going to happen unless you have those examples of your parents who, they were the ones who invited you into that conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think it is fascinating too. And one thing just on that retreat, for those who were able to be with us last week, I mean, that whole idea of tying discipleship and our generosity to our discipleship and to our relationship with God, it's reaffirming to see that there's a universal piece in our universal call to discipleship. And if we can help people through that journey, it will lead to greater discipleship, which would lead to greater generosity and support of the church's works. So that's encouraging to see. The other thing I would say is just for others out there who might be of Euro descent, we do some work with friends in Germany and in Italy. And for those who are not familiar, the church in Germany, anybody who is registered as a Catholic, and you have to do that with the government, they automatically take 8% of your income as a tax. So the government collects 8% of your income as a tax and then distributes that to the diocese, and the diocese distributes that out to the parishes. So there's no giving in Germany. The concept of giving in a collection is foreign to them. I remember the first time I heard of that model, that was so mind-blowing to me, I couldn't even fathom how that would work, because I was raised in this American model of generosity. So it gave me appreciation for other people who are raised in different models, how we do have to go through this journey of education to say, no, here's the way we do things here, and here's why we do it here, and here's what the implications are of that. And I think we can't take that education for granted, which is clearly what you found.
For sure.
As well.
For sure.
There was one other question, and maybe I think it kind of speaks to your observation on the flattening of ministries, but there was a question of somebody who serves on the finance council in a wealthier suburban parish that has very nearby and has a minority presence of people who are of Latinx descent. And his observation, his perception, he owns it as a perception, is that the church might not do as much to reach out to them, and that those folks may not be as engaged, which could be an extra contributing factor to it. So I don't know if you can speak to whether the outreach needs to be different, but also your concept of flattening the ministries and how that might potentially be a disadvantage, Maureen.
For sure. Yeah. So I should say also, the parishes that I looked at were, there were some parishes that the pastor told me they were around 98% Hispanic. And there were some parishes that what Brett Hoover would call shared parishes. So they were roughly 50% Hispanic and usually 50% white. And then but one of the parishes was 50% Hispanic, 50% Black. So I had different demographics going on, but, and I'm sorry, I said that. And then what was your question again, Matt?
So the question was, should the outreach to folks be different? And your broader point of the potential risk of flattening the ministries if we don't do that.
Right. And so I think that that what can happen is that we forget that people have different experiences of life, and that tithing is one part of that. Stewardship is one part of that life. And that if we want to be culturally sensitive to those things, we need to listen to what resonates and what those experiences are, and then create a whether that's a stewardship program or a faith formation program that pulls in on those experiences. And I think that too often, I don't know if it's in haste or if it's, but that there's something like a one size fits all sort of way of doing ministry. And that tends to be really like a Eurocentric way of doing ministry. And so we want to make sure that we are listening to the people that we're ministering to well, so that we can accompany them in whatever sort of challenges or growth or celebrations they're experiencing.
I imagine that probably was consistent with the work you even did with your young adult research and your campus ministry research as well, that they want to be treated differently because of where they are.
Yes, right.
Meeting people where they are. I think you just said something about that once, didn't they? Just a real quick one, but the stat of 93% of Hispanics under 18 are born in the US. Where did that come from, Maureen? Do you know the source for that?
I cannot
that's
tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So
We
sorry.
can find that.
But please email me and I'll get it to you, because I do definitely have it. So
Yes.
Mhm.
But this has really been outstanding. I think we got most of the big ones in there. We may get into a little later conversation about the difference between corresponsabilidad and mayordomia, which I can't pronounce either, but apparently it's another potential. Have you heard of that frame?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so maybe in the stoppage time after 2 o'clock, we can jump into that a little bit more as well. But again, this was really outstanding research that you did, very valuable research that you did, and as we all heard today, also very practical in terms of things that for anyone out there at your churches, whether they have Latinx communities or not, but the whole thinking of what are the stewardship frames that we're using, and are they ones that resonate with our people or not? And if not, how can we help people through that journey of understanding and education in order to ultimately grow in their relationship with God, which will lead to greater generosity. But yeah, without the other pieces in place, it'd be very difficult for people to do that.
For sure.
So,
right.
So for the folks who are here, next week we come back for the final of this 3-part series. So we're back again next Friday, and we're going to take a specific look at the COVID impact on church giving. And so there's some research that Alicia Strandberg and I from the School of Business did. So we'll be sharing the findings from that research, and then tie it to some research that Chuck Zeck and Bob West did, looking at kind of some of the risks that might happen, particularly in a situation like the world that we're in COVID, where some of the normal financial controls might not be in place. And so we just want to talk about that as we continue to plan for 2021. And we'll also see if we can even bring in some of the research that David King and his colleagues did out at the Lake Center at Indiana on other denominations. Our work was in the Catholic tradition, but there's also some work out there in others on the impact of COVID on parish collections and what we can do for that going forward. So thank you all again for being here. I do want to again thank the Lilly Endowment for their support for this. Thank the other benefactors of the center. I see many members of our advisory council and our benefactors who are here with us today. So thank you to all of our friends who are doing that. And again, really, and Maureen, just want to thank you one more time for the great work that you do, the great scholarship that you do, but the great ministry that your scholarship provides to so many of us in the church. We are most grateful for it.
Well, and thank you for helping me disseminate. So great.
Absolutely. Dan, I'll just ask you if we missed anything else, and if not, then you can stop the recording. But are any final announcements that I did not cover, Dan?
I think we're all set. I think we got them all.
All right, great. Then we will officially stop the recording, and we'll open up the room, and we'll stick it around for some more conversation and dialogue. I think once we open up the room, Dan, too, so we'll give everyone a minute to log off for those who want to jump off, and we will stop the recording here.